Good afternoon, everybody. It's just turned 12 o'clock. I'm David Webley, and I'm joined today by David McCredie. Welcome to Conversations with Thought Leaders. It's Wednesday, the 24th of June. I'm joining from Melbourne. David, I believe you're in Sydney today.
I am indeed, yeah.
Now more than ever, Australia and the UK are working closely in negotiating a comprehensive free trade agreement between the two countries. David himself, as I said, he's the CEO, and he's a trusted advisor to both businesses and government, providing a valuable link, sharing insights, ideas, and affecting change. He's a regular on mainstream media, such as ABC, Sky News, and CNN. We've all heard of Brexit, although in recent months, and understandably, it's taken a back seat as the world's dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's well and truly now back on the agenda. And David's spending an awful lot of time representing business interests and discussions with government negotiators. And, speaking from personal experience, with both the JobKeeper in Australia and the furlough scheme in the UK, can you talk to us about, your views around both scenarios and, perhaps clearly hypothetical, but in the fullness of time, I wonder which will have been judged to be more successful?
Yeah, look, I think, the reality is only time will actually give us that answer. But when you look at the differences between the two programs, the JobKeeper program here allows staff to continue to work and be linked obviously directly to their employer on a regular basis, to have calls. We had a session a couple of weeks ago with Corporate Traveller where they talked about the Zoom calls they have with team members who are not currently working for the team. So there's quite a strong capability to keep people engaged and look after people's health and mental health, particularly during this period. The UK is slightly different. The furloughing scheme over there, it covers 80% of your wages up to £5,000 a month. So it's a reasonably generous scheme. It covers, similar to JobKeeper, it covers quite a wide array of businesses. But the key difference really from a business's point of view is that those people are not allowed to work. They are on furlough, meaning that they are connected still to the business, but absolutely not allowed to work. So we've seen messages around the place about make sure you're not logging into your work email from home or sending messages, not reposting social media posts and so forth. So it's a little bit more distal. So personally, I prefer the Australian model. I think it will probably prove to be the better one in the longer term. But as I said earlier, only time will actually give us that answer.
And so going forward, if we start to talk about, the relationship between the two countries, and obviously there's a very big historical relationship there, but do you think post-pandemic it will still be as critical as it has been, or do you think our proximity to Asia being the highest growth area of the world will become more and more important, and might we see a bit of a new world order?
Look, I think what we've seen over the last 20 years or so, particularly through China, but before that, Japan, Korea, our engagement with countries just like much closer to home, including Indonesia, whose free trade agreement comes into force in a few days' time. We need the opportunity to trade with other countries, and certainly the opportunity to do that locally in our own region makes a lot of sense. We know that the population is still growing strongly in Asia. If we take China and India alone, both with over 1 billion people, they're great markets. The UK is 66 million people. The whole of Europe's only 500 million. The US is only 300 and something million. So there's some really big markets and great opportunities to work in Asian countries, absolutely. But I think what the pandemic's probably taught us as well is we need to make sure that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. And obviously, when China was closing itself down and our own border restrictions from China, some of the supply chains have been sorely tested, and in some cases have been found wanting. And that's that could equally be true of other supply chains and globally. I think it's been great to see the Australian government's response to that is to look at how we make sure that industry in Australia is well supported and how we make sure that going forward we do have some of those capabilities onshore, even if they're not generally used for that. I mean, one of the great things that we saw in the UK, was the likes of Dyson and Jaguar Land Rover and Rolls-Royce and others turning their production lines into creating ventilators for the UK health system. We saw some of that here in Australia. Thankfully, we weren't as in dire and desperate need as the UK was at that time. But those sorts of things are going to be important. But going forward, the Australian-UK relationship is really important to Australia. It's the second largest source of investment. We have a two-way investment relationship of over 900 billion. So that's very significant. We've got a two-way trading relationship of about $30 billion a year, which has been growing strongly over the last few years. And we think that will continue. And we think the opportunity to enhance that and to draw out more of those similarities and traditional relationships that we've had and make them into more commercial and more engaged relationships going forward will only lead to more investment, which means more jobs here in Australia, more production here in Australia. Not just in terms of goods, though, it's got to be clear that we're also talking about professional services. We're talking about areas of new exploration, if you like, working hard, obviously, on things like cybersecurity, which has obviously been in the news in the last week, around things like fintech with the CDR or the consumer data right coming into play again in the next few days, based in part on the UK open banking experience and where that can go for consumers here in Australia. There are huge opportunities in front of us, basically across the spectrum, because the great thing about the Australia-UK relationship is that it is a couple of 100 years old, and the UK and Australia have worked hard at investing in each other and understanding those opportunities for a long time. And the ability to unlock a few of those last barriers that do exist and really look at not just the things that can be achieved in a free trade agreement in terms of reducing tariffs or removing tariffs altogether. The aim is no tariffs, no quotas, free access to both markets, and freeing up the opportunity for business people to move more freely between the two countries and live and work in each other's countries. That will enhance capital flows between the two countries and trading goods, of course. So all of those things are there for us to really liberalise, and two very open trading nations historically, the UK coming out of the EU and really recognising, part of the story of global Britain is growth in the rest of the world compared to the EU has been much higher over the last 15, 20 years. And the UK don't feel that they've got as much benefit out of that other growth as they have out of the EU. So the opportunity for them to reach out and engage directly with the rest of the world, rather than having to wait for the other 27 countries to be on the same page, is a great opportunity. So there's lots to do between now and the end of the year when they hope to finalise the agreement. But I'm really positive about the ambition. The level of ambition is extraordinary. The idea that this could be the gold standard, if you like, of free trade agreement between two very open and agreeable countries. We've got deep ties, we're strong allies, we're very like-minded. If we can't do the best deal in the world, I'd be very disappointed.
So do you think the pandemic significantly changed the narrative around Brexit?
Look, I think obviously in terms of within the UK, it's been all-consuming in terms of the press coverage. But what's been happening in the background is David Frost, who's the Sherpa for Boris Johnson on the EU deal, has been working away. They've had numerous rounds of negotiations. They had a leaders' meeting a few weeks ago now, where the UK expressed that it did still plan to leave the EU in terms of the transition period, having formally left on the 31st of January. It's still pushing down that path. There are some issues still to negotiate in terms of their ongoing relationship, but I think they're getting closer. And a little bit of pressure, I think, always helps to get the deal over the line at the back end, and a serious impact on both European and UK economies if they don't get a good deal together. Could be very negative for both sides. But we'll wait and see what happens there. And that's been going on. So whilst COVID has been taking the headlines, there's been work going on in the background. And if you look just at the Department of International Trade's work in the last little while, they've launched negotiations with the US. They've launched the renegotiation of the Japanese deal, which hasn't rolled over from the arrangements that Japan have with the EU. They've also launched, obviously, Australia and New Zealand last week. So there's a lot happening actually in the background, which possibly isn't getting the press coverage that it might if we didn't have the pandemic going at the same time.
Do you think if Australia was a republic, the relationship would be less relevant?
No.
Fantastic.
I don't. Look, to be honest, the reason why the relationship between Australia and the UK is so strong is not because of our head of state. It's because, firstly, there are people like your good self who are dual nationals, and when you came to Australia, you would have still had a network of people and family and friends back in the UK. And when you're looking to grow your business, and particularly looking to grow it internationally, you're going to look at the places you know best first. And when you think about Australia and the UK, one of the things we hope to achieve through the free trade agreement is currently we have a market here of about 25 million people. In the UK, it's about nearly 67 million people. Put those together, you've got nearly 100 million people who speak the same language, have very similar legal base framework. You've got very similar views on accounting standards, things like the multinational tax that we talked about earlier. Quite frankly, one of the things that we talk about here at the Chamber quite often is, and this is very stereotypical, but there are lots of Brits who come to Australia, they pop down to Bondi Beach, go for a swim, they come out and they feel like they're Australian because the cultures are so similar, the opportunities are so similar, and the way that we work is so similar that it's really easy to do that. And I don't think that has anything to do with who the head of state is, whether that's the Queen, whether that's the President of Australia. I think it's completely irrelevant for business.
Talking about greater cooperation, do you think as part of a free trade agreement, there might be easier for 6 to 12 months secondments from a business point of view? Both ways?
Look, I think it goes back to the earlier conversation around what does it need to look like to make these things work, and we're very keen to make all business travel and movement easier between the two places. That will underpin the benefits that we can really derive out of the free trade agreement. So I think that along with longer term placements, all of that is up for discussion, and we at the Chamber are very, very keen to make that as easy for business to do as possible. If you're registered to have foreign workers here in Australia, your organisation has to be registered, then the person needs a visa. If your organisation's registered, we want to make it as simple as possible. Once you've done that, for people movement between the two countries, to make those opportunities really seamless, so that we get the best value out of the talent that could be available to us if we make that easy.
Yeah, 100%. So I think we're about out of time, but I want to thank you for everything you do and the Chamber's efforts. I mean, you spoke about the events. I remember fondly a couple of the events where, you kindly invited me to meet the Lord Mayor of London, and also an event where I met Ian Botham, who was a childhood hero of mine, which was brilliant. I think that was the first event I ever went to, actually. So I'd like to take the opportunity to really recommend the Australian British Chamber of Commerce and everything you do for the community. And David, thank you so much. I know you're a very busy man, but thank you for taking time out of your schedule to speak with us today and share your insights to our community. So I wish you all the best, and we'll keep in touch. David, thank you, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, David.
Okay, cheers.